Well, welcome to this talk, and a particular welcome to James Roguski. James, thank you for coming back on the channel.
Well, thank you for having me. I know it was very short notice and this is a timely issue, so I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
And there is a degree of urgency here, I think, isn't there? Now, we're talking about the international health regulations. Could you start off by giving us a bit of a timetable as to what's going on here as regards the adoptions of these, some might say, draconian Orwellian regulations, James?
Well, the last thing in the world I want to do is be seen as fear mongering. Okay. I want to make sure that people get the facts straight. And to start off, what we have to clarify is that a lot of what is being said in the media, a lot of times talks about the pandemic treaty. Well, that's a totally different thing. We're not talking about that, maybe some other day. What we're talking about are two separate collections of amendments. The primary one that we're going to be talking about today actually was adopted by the World Health Assembly on May 27th, 2022. And the deadline to reject those amendments is 18 months, which is scheduled for December 1st, 2023, about 2 months from now. There's a separate pile of amendments, over 300, that were submitted on September 30th of 2022. So those have been secretly being negotiated. They're going to be submitted to the International Health Regulations Review Committee, scheduled to be submitted to them on December 15th. And there has been no release of any revised edition, no version 2.0, no public comment, no debate in Parliament or Congress or Senate, nothing on the news. Everybody's talking about the treaty, and this is just quietly rolling along, and the danger of it is in the method in which it is officially adopted. And this is the part that hurts everyone's brains because it's different. In my opinion, it's different than it should be, but I deal in reality. And so this is how it is, and we're right in the middle of it. If the unelected, unaccountable, and largely unknown delegates from the 194 member nations meet in Geneva, like they did in 2022, and they adopt amendments to the international health regulations, it is assumed that every nation is okay with that. There's an 18-month period where the leader of every nation can step up and just write a letter to the WHO and say, I invoke Article 61 and I reject whatever that was for our nation. Every other nation can accept them if they want to, but for our nation, we reject them. Well, they've procrastinated and said nothing for 16 months now. There's 2 more months left. And in the United Kingdom and in Canada and in Australia and a handful of other nations as well, there are official petition mechanisms. And last time I checked in the UK, 67 days ago, the threshold of 100,000 signatures was reached, and the people in the UK have been waiting for more than 2 months for a scheduled discussion of this issue. And that's really what this is about. What's with all the secrecy?
You know, the things that really concern me, James, and why I was so pleased that you chose to come on was, first of all, this idea that it's all going to happen by default unless there's active intervention. We're just rolling into this. It's like a car with a handbrake off it rolling towards the end of a cliff. If someone doesn't put the handbrake on, we're just going to go over that cliff and these are going to be adopted. It's a default situation. It's almost a fail dangerous sort of situation. And I wasn't aware of these further amendments that have been put into, shall we say, spice up the international health regulations. I suspect they give it even more draconian powers. Now, could you just tell us a little bit about the history of the international health regulations, what these amendments are, and why you're concerned?
Well, to really give sort of a full history, you got to kind of go back to the 1850s. And if you think of a time when people used horses to travel, and so there was excrement all over the place, and you didn't have indoor plumbing and septic systems and sewage, treatment plants and all that, sanitation was a problem. And so it started with the international sanitary regulations. Fast forward to World War II, by that time, people were driving cars, they had indoor plumbing, sewage, not everywhere in the world, but in a vast, swath of civilization, we cleaned up our act. I mean, the sanitation regulations did a good job. Disease rates plummeted. And then they start jabbing people and they give credit to the jabs for what sanitation actually did. So the WHO, when it was founded, inherited the control of that. And in 1969, they renamed it the International Health Regulations. And it was only dealing with some specific ailments. And then it had some small amendments in the 80s, and in 2005, after SARS 1 and the anthrax scare and all that sort of thing, they did a lot of amendments to it. And so the form that it is currently in, we've been dealing with for about 18 years. And arguably, I have things that I would nitpick about it, and I would certainly like to change some things. But, it's been serving for 18 years, but now they really, 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 really want to change it. Now, the amendments that we're talking about that are the deadline to reject them is December 1st. There were only 5 amendments. So it's a very simple thing to wrap your head around, and primarily one of them is what's really important. Now, the way this all happened was very interesting because there were negotiations going on at the end of 2021, but then the Biden administration quietly, on January 18th, 2022, submitted a bunch of amendments that I talked about last year, and ultimately what happened was that submission was kicked to the curb. It was not brought up for a vote or consideration because many nations made it very clear that there was not going to be consensus. And the WHO likes consensus. They don't want to see a roll call vote to see, the opposition. So a different set of amendments were submitted at the last minute, and the United Kingdom was one of the nations that signed on as a proponent to this, along with the U.S. and the European Union and Australia and Japan and Monaco and Bosnia and Herzegovina, a handful of other nations. And it would shorten the time period that nations have to reject what is coming. This big pile of 300 amendments would not have 18 months to be rejected. It would only have 10 months to be rejected. Well, if that had been in place, everybody would have missed it. Okay, we're already 16 months past the amendments, that we're considering now, and so shortening the period of time to change an international set of regulations, there's a reason for it, and this is, I mentioned to you, John, earlier, I stick to facts, so come with me onto Speculation Island, all right, because now I'm going to engage in speculation. The Biden administration initially wanted to shorten the time period to 6 months. If you think forward on your calendar to May of 2024 and go 6 months beyond that, you're in November of 2024. It doesn't have anything to do with our elections. It would still be the Biden administration. But that got negotiated out to 10 months, which actually would bring you to about April 1st of 2025. So potentially there could be a new administration and a new Congress, right? So I hold out hope, right? Because the negotiations were tough in 2022 and they did not get their way, the change that they want to make is to shorten it from 18 to 10 months, but they wanted it to be 6 months. Well, I got to tell you, 6 months to consider, 200 pages of amendments to an 84-page document. What is the reason for that? What is the rush? You can adopt them quicker if you want to, but to force every nation to shorten the time frame, clearly we've gone more than 10 months and nobody said a word. And so, I wish I could devise systems that would benefit from procrastination, because that's what we're dealing with. The simple fact that members of parliament and Congress and the Senate and everybody else, the media, just by not doing anything, something happens. That is the danger that we're dealing with, and we will deal again with these many amendments. The rule is not that all of these amendments will come back to Parliament or Congress or the Senate for an approval. The approval is assumed unless the leader of your nation writes a letter rejecting them. Well, hold on a minute. Those are the people who submitted them. They're not listening to the people. They're not listening to 100,000 people who signed a petition. And also in Canada, um, in April and May, in the Canadian system, they only need 500 signatures in 30 days to have a petition supposed to be submitted to Parliament. They got 18,973 signatures in 30 days. In Australia, they got 55,700 and some, I believe, in 30 days. The UK petition system is a 6-month period. And bless her, Tess Laurie took this information and on April 3rd of 2023 submitted a petition. I know we've talked about it, and you helped spread the word about it. So the deadline is October 3rd, Tuesday, October 3rd. So there's already 100,000 signatures, but part of this is just to raise everyone's awareness of why has there not been a discussion, not about the treaty. Yes, I know they had a debate in Parliament on April 17th, and maybe 5 or 6 members of Parliament, were there talking about it. That was a different document, and I got news for you. The document that they discussed in April about the quote-unquote treaty, well, that's been thrown away, and they had a new document on June 2nd, and that's being thrown away, and they're promising a new document for the Framework Convention mid-October, end of October, to be made public. Well, it's a whole new thing. So whatever they discussed back in April, forget about it. And in terms of the 300 plus amendments, since they've been negotiating for a year, and we have not seen any new document, any comment about the details that are in there, as egregious as they may be, we're flying blind. There's been no public comment, no public discussion, no reveal. And from October 2nd to October 6th, the working group for the amendments to the international health regulations are meeting in Geneva to discuss some very important things. They're scheduled to discuss Articles 1, 2, and 3, which Article 1 is the definition of terms. So words like vaccine or pandemic or safe and effective or case, nothing. And this brings to mind something that unfortunately I didn't get a chance to put in the notes that I sent you, but I'll mention it because I think it's really important.
Please.
Article 21 of the WHO Constitution says that the WHO shall have the authority to write regulations, and they list 5 things that they have the authority to write regulations about. Now, regulations are supposed to mean to make regular. You set standards. Now, some of the things they're supposed to be setting standards for, I hope they would, but I don't think that this is what they're talking about. They're talking about many different things. One of the things they're supposed to set standards for is the safety of biological products that go in international trade. Do you think they've been doing a good job of that? I haven't even seen anything from their quality assurance work. They're supposed to set standards for advertising and labeling. Well, what's with all of the blank inserts? There should be a regulation that does not permit that. They're also supposed to set standards for nomenclature, right? Terminology,
Mm.
like I've been mentioning, as well as um, disease diagnostics. Um, the set of symptoms for COVID could be a whole heck of a lot of other things, and it kept changing. And I didn't really ever, see clarity on, well, we're using this thing that's not really a test; it's a process called PCR, and depending upon the cycle threshold, you get a 97% false positive. How is that the WHO fulfilling their obligation to write regulations about diagnostic testing? So they're failing to regulate the things that they're charged with regulating. And what they're getting into are areas that, involve building out infrastructure and factories and laboratories and transfer of wealth from um, wealthy nations to poor nations under the guise of equity, and just things that they don't have authority to do. I wrote an article a couple of months ago about, well, here's all of the things that they're doing. Can you match those up with the authorities that they've been given to write regulations in the Constitution? They don't seem to match up. They're not questioning, well, what are the standards for a mask, right? If you wear a mask, it's it's a source control device so that you don't maybe sneeze on somebody, but it doesn't protect you, and they know it, right? If you're wearing, a respirator that might protect you, but it has a vent on it, so you can actually wear it for a long period of time. Well, you're certainly not protecting other people, okay? Um, did they analyze, remdesivir and midazolam and molnupiravir and Paxlovid, and whether or not, that and the ventilators and the protocols that were enforced, did those save people or did those kill people? You know, where is the analysis of that to write protocols for such things? They're not talking about health. If you actually pull up the international health regulations, they're improperly named. If you just go through the articles in the document, they would be more properly named the International Surveillance, Monitoring, Reporting, Emergency Declaring, Fear Mongering Control Regulations. Now, if you look at just the articles and you realize that that's what they are, you ask yourself, what is it that they're doing? They're not doing the things that we, the people, know in our hearts and in our minds need to be done. We need to examine. We need to do, an after-event review. What just happened, right? Okay, let's not do that again. Well, the lessons that they seem to have learned are, well, we were able to get 75% of the Western world to accept the jab, but only 25% of the developing world. We need to do better in getting jabs into black and brown people. And so they want this transfer of wealth to what I call the pharmaceutical hospital emergency industrial complex. And so what we're looking at here are not negotiations about health. They're not calling in doctors. I mean, they could call you in and have you talk about all of the facts that you've been presenting for months, but that's not what this is about. This is about money, um, intellectual property, and a good example of what has triggered this is, and I feel it should be a negotiation maybe for the World Trade Organization, because it's really a trade dispute. If you think back to the time when South Africa and Botswana said, ooh, we've got some genomic sequences, and this Omicron thing, it's really different. And they alerted the world that something was going on. Well, rather than be thanked and praised and supported for having done good investigative work and honestly letting the world know, they were greeted with travel restrictions, and now they're looking at, Now they're looking at Pfizer and Moderna taking that information, turning it into boosters and making billions of dollars. And what they're arguing for, now this is in the Framework Convention, they want a pathogen access and benefits sharing system. Well, that idea comes from a
Yeah.
1992 Convention on Biological Diversity. They're basically saying, hey, if we go into a bat cave or a chicken coop or our septic system or sewage treatment plant or I don't know a wet market or a pangolin enclosure somewhere, and we find a new fancy pathogen, it's ours. And if you want it, you're going to have to pay us. You're going to have to give us some benefit, right? Pathogen access, benefit sharing system. So I put together the People's Declaration. The UN is trying to make all these declarations. If you go to thepeoplesdeclaration.com, my personal declaration, and you're free to say whatever it is you want to say, is, well, hold on a moment. You're negotiating on a worldwide basis something to want to stop the next pandemic. Well, what if that pandemic came from the Wuhan lab and you want to go out into the countryside and gather pathogens that are not necessarily causing pandemics, but they have the potential to do so? You want to bring those into the lab, share them all around the world. Um, that seems to me to be very close to biological weapons research. What I would like to see is negotiations, shut these things down. You're not doing what you need to do. Shut them down and negotiate a treaty to put an end to gain of function research. Well, that's not what they're doing. They're negotiating the capacity to spend billions of dollars to do what could be viewed as biological weapons warfare research. And so if their goal is to prevent the next pandemic, I don't think building more laboratories to look for more pathogens, to go work on them to make them more transmissible and give them additional function. Um, Boy, does that seem wrong-headed to you, John?
It does seem to have the potential to be, let me think of a term here, weaponized, utilized in ways that might not be good for people that were infected with those viruses. And that's really what we're interested in. Now, there's so many things have alarmed me there, James. The Biden administration trying to cut out the period of consultation. Now, if someone from the Biden administration would like to come on the channel, of course, they'd be more than welcome. If not, let me know why you think they might have wanted to curtail the period of negotiation. Why hasn't my Prime Minister written this, what was it, James, Article 61? He could just send a letter and say, no, you know what? I represent the British people. I am for the British people. I don't want them to be subjugated to these unelected bureaucrats in Geneva who may have ulterior motives for what they do, who may be controlled by external influences in what they do. I want the British people to be proud and free. He could do that, but hasn't done that. I just find it such a travesty of democracy. And I wasn't aware of how extensive this pathogen sharing thing was. I mean, potentially, if you're sharing pathogens, you could have the same pathogen that could mistakenly be released in 6 countries all at the same time. And then what chance would we have?
One of the things that
Doesn't bear thinking about.
One of the things that happened recently came as a bit of a surprise, but it actually gives me hope that there are diplomats or bureaucrats around the world who do know the rules. Okay, and so there's many things we've been talking about, but in September, the United Nations got together and they were hoping to put out all of these various declarations about the Sustainable Development Goals and pandemics and universal health care and tuberculosis. And they had this same sort of procedure. They set up the meeting a year back on September 2nd, 2022. They scheduled a meeting for this year. And at the beginning of September this year, they circulated these documents as part of what they call their silence procedure. And the idea is if nobody says anything, then it means you're okay. Well, interestingly enough, on Sunday, the 17th of September, the day before all these meetings were supposed to start, 11 nations got together and wrote a letter to the president of the United Nations General Assembly. And they said, they literally, John, they used the word pretend. They said, we don't really appreciate that you're pretending that this high-level meeting speaks for the entire United Nations General Assembly. And they basically said, we object to this. And so what happened at the meeting was that they said, well, or the president of the General Assembly gavelled the meeting into open session. And he said, oh, well, we're going to start off with this declaration. And I trust that everybody here is good with it. And so subject to what these 11 nations demanded in a letter, he said, subject to, at some later date, we'll take this up with the full General Assembly, we adopt these. And that is how they roll, right? They then put forth the propaganda machine to make it sound like that was the full-on United Nations General Assembly putting their stamp of approval on it. But that may come at some point in the future. You have to know how to pay attention to the little tiny things that they do that aren't the way they're presented in the media. And so what we're being fed is misinformation from the very people who claim that when we expose the truth, that, quite frankly, I'm adopting it. John, what you've been doing is presenting all of the information that everyone else is missing, right? So, misinformation from people such as yourself is actually the missing information that the official people don't want you to catch on to. So, thank you for doing all that you've been doing in that regard.
Not at all, James. It sounds like we're being manipulated, and international agencies such as the United Nations are being manipulated by a relatively small group of what some might see as vested interests. Now, when I read these regulations, the original regulations were saying things like there won't be compulsion. And the amendments of the regulations were just taking out a single word to change it from won't to will or things like that. So the impression I'm getting is there's going to be a whole host of these regulations that are going to be enforceable at the level of the nation state. In other words, my concern is that this unelected bureaucratic group, potentially representing vested interests, can put forward its dictates, some might say its tentacles, into different countries in the world, and their word from Geneva will have the power of law in my country and in your country. Because when we put our last video up, James, it's been well viewed, the last video, many people simply said, well, I'm not doing this, I won't comply. I'm not going to accept this. But the point is, if you've got the power of the state saying you will accept this, then you've no choice, because it's got the power. So it seems to me that they are usurping the power of the nation state that our governments correctly have over us, because otherwise we'd have anarchy. And they're using that for their own, some might say, parasitic purposes. I just find this whole thing really sinister.
Well, I agree with the sinister nature of it, certainly nefarious. And let me give a couple, maybe 3 examples.
Please.
In the Bureau's text, and I'm sorry for the word salad, but I've been living on word salad since I started looking at the WHO documents.
Our viewers are smart, James. They can cope with it.
In the Bureau's text of the WHO Convention Agreement Plus that was published on June 2nd, and I call it a framework convention because that's what it is, Chapter 3 sets up a framework convention where they would have a conference of the parties. That would be a bureaucracy that would be created and given authority. So if you agree to give up authority to a bunch of unelected, unknown, unaccountable bureaucrats, I think you're behaving strangely, to say the least. But what that group would be made up of is delegates from the nations, but also representatives from corporate organizations, things that are, in my view, they're pandemic profiteers. The companies that make jabs and drugs and testing equipment and laboratory equipment and personal protective equipment, whatever, if they're accepted because they're buddy-buddy with the people who are in the conference of parties, then they get a seat at the table and they have an inside view as to how they're going to spend the $30 billion a year that they want to pump into the pharmaceutical hospital emergency industrial complex. Add to that United Nations agencies and all of the foundations and relevant stakeholders like Bill and Melinda Gates and so forth. Those people would make up the conference of the parties, and under Article 38 of that document, they could write detailed protocols every time they meet, going off into the future to infinity. Well, it's kind of like if you had a contract that you were going to sign, and the person that you're working with says, well, hold on a moment, let me put a couple of dozen sheets of blank paper in here. I'll have my people that I pick later fill in all of the details. Just sign here on the dotted line. It's that insane. Now, don't take my word for it. Go back to 1992 and look up the Framework Convention for Climate Change. If you think insanity has taken over our world, I don't think you need to look too much further than an agreement that puts authority into an unknown group of people to make decisions about climate. Well, what affects the climate? They think it's everything. Do you want to have your nation agree to a framework convention for pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response that includes the One Health approach, which says pretty much everything you could possibly think of has an impact on your health, so we're in charge? Do you really want to give authority to an unknown band, a cabal of oligarchs who want to set up a cartel to create a laboratory network where they can share pathogens and develop more biological weapons and take your public money and fund the building, which they're already doing, of factories and laboratories to make more poisons to inject into more people to turn healthy people into customers? I say no. Stop this. Just stop it. No treaty, no amendments. Where is the review, and not a cockamamie made up, government sponsored review like, the Warren Commission report after the JFK assassination, or the 9/11 Commission report, or the Challenger Commission? We the people know what happened the last 4 years. And they're not addressing any of that. They're going forward with the lessons that they learned, which is they fooled some of the people. And there's a bunch of people that they're going to try to fool again by fear mongering. Oh, we found a new pathogen. We've turned it into a jab that you have to take to protect you for something that would not require statistics that so many people got sick, so many people died. They would just be able to say it has the potential to cause a pathogen. Therefore, you got to do this, and this. I simply say no, shut this down. And quite frankly, I've been pushing exitthewho.org. When you're in a relationship with an abusive partner, or if somebody was in an abusive relationship, you don't negotiate for better terms.
No.
You leave. And that's what we need to do. Just get out.
Get out. Yeah, absolutely. So there's problems here that may be genuine problems, or problems that have been overstated, that are being used as an excuse to centralize power, potentially oppressing the rest of us. And all our leaders have to do is write this letter with Section 61, and we're out of it. And the fact that President Biden and my Prime Minister and the leaders around the world have not done this I must say I find surprising that they're prepared to cede so much sovereignty so lightly. I mean, in the past, armies have fought and died over issues like this,
Join
and now
me.
we just seem to be saying, "Okay, never mind, take it away."
Join me again for a moment, John, on Speculation Island, okay? Because
Yeah,
I can't prove this. With what happened with the 11 nations that wrote a letter at the last minute, okay? Think about this scenario. There's 194 nations plus two observer nations that are party to the international health regulations. They all have the opportunity to reject the amendments that were adopted last year, but they have to do so by December 1st. I encourage
yeah.
those 11 nations to do again what they did to the UN. And, somewhere at the end of November, what if some of the nations are on the ball and they realize that these amendments to shorten the time period to make changes, um, they're irrelevant. You can make changes quickly if you want to, but if you agree that you have to, quite frankly, that's a stupid thing to agree to. You can always move quickly if you think something needs to happen, and you can adopt a change fast. But if you agree that you have to do it fast, maybe you're going to miss something and make a mistake.
Mm.
In my prayers, many leaders from many nations will find the wisdom and the courage to stand up to the WHO on behalf of their nation and say, you know what,
Mm.
these changes are ridiculous. They don't improve
Mm.
anybody's health at all. And it's
Mm.
going to shorten the time period that we're going to have to consider these big changes, which are stupid. But why would anybody say we want to shorten the time period to consider such important? So in my prayers, I see many leaders of many nations having the courage to just say, nope, thank you very much. Now, if they do it at the last minute and the deadline ends, then all of the stupid leaders in the countries who didn't understand how politics works and they were asleep and they did not reject the amendments, they're going to be bound by them. And then we're all going to get to look at our stupid leaders who got punked by nations who are smarter and more savvy and have more courage to tell the WHO to go take a hike. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. And the sheer inactivity from our leaders raises to me the potential of stupidity, of course. But it also, to me, raises the possibility that they are already compromised in some way. Because why aren't they acting to protect the sovereignty of individual nation states? So it really is quite, there's a few possibilities there for why this isn't happening. But I must say, from what I've been told, James, I'm reasonably pessimistic about this. It looks like these are going to be, we're going to fight it, of course, but it looks like these could well be accepted. There's going to be a loss of sovereignty. There's going to be a globalization, an internationalization. Particular elites will take disproportionate amounts of control, and the rest of us can be subjugated on various pretexts. The pretext of it being for our own good, when it's anything but for our own good. It makes me a little bit pessimistic. Are you optimistic or pessimistic?
Well, I wouldn't be doing what I was doing if I wasn't optimistic. And
Yeah,
there's a couple of things that we talked about, and maybe we can wind this all up because I know people's attention, time is precious. And so let me try, let me try to summarize what I what
please.
I feel. Okay. First and foremost, I do this all the time and people think I'm crazy, but I've met spectacular people. So if anybody has any questions about any of this, my phone number is 310-619-3055. I'm in the United States. I'm in California. I'm on Signal and Telegram and WhatsApp, so you can text me or call me or use any of those apps. If you have any questions at all, I am that serious about it. There's been groups all around the world who have joined into this. If you go to exitthewho.org, you can see if somebody in your country is pushing back and get connected with them. The information about the amendments is on stoptheamendments.com, and it's about both sets of amendments, stoptheamendments.com. Don't do a search for that, because search engines will take you on a wild goose chase somewhere. That is the domain. Just type it in and go there. My personal declaration in regards to all of this, and you're welcome to copy it and adapt it and do whatever you want with it, is on thepeoplesdeclaration.com. And a year ago, I set up screwthewho.com, and hundreds of people have recorded their opinion. And so if you go to screwthewho.com, you can see what people had to say a year ago. Well, John, if the WHO really had their way, I don't think they would want us to even be having this conversation. I think they would have preferred to just keep it all nice and quiet, have their little meetings, get into May 2024, adopt these amendments, let time go by, let them be enacted into, legally binding law, and then start implementing it. And then everybody goes, hey, what are you doing? You can't do that. And then they would be able to say, oh, but we told you, post it on some website quietly somewhere. And you had all of this time to speak up. Okay. Well, I encourage each and every person watching this. There's a simple thing you can do. Take the link to this video, and if there is a single person that you know of and you can contact, and you do not share it with that person, and by that I mean share it with everybody, your friends, your family, your politicians, your government officials, public servants, up and down the thing, share this with everybody, because if you don't, then you're engaging in censorship. So share this information. Obviously, the algorithms are not going to do it for you, right?
No.
So the easy starting point is take this link to this video, share it.
And the links that we'll post below this video.
Share it far and wide, because it's our job in a representative form of government to instruct our public servants what we want. They're busy listening to donors and lobbyists and the World Economic Forum and whoever it is that pulls their strings. We need to get in touch with them. We need to attach our strings to them, and we need to start yanking on their chain to do what we tell them to do. They don't tell us what we get. They work for us. And so, honestly, we the people have maybe failed a little bit in keeping an eye on our employees, and they're starting to lose their minds, if not already. And so if we get in touch with them and we clearly tell them what it is we want, and then they fail to do what we instruct them to do, then it's their bad. If you don't do that, then you have to look in the mirror and blame yourself.
Yeah. James, I want to close. There's some words written 2,500 years ago by a guy called Ezekiel, because I think this applies to you, because you are the watchman for many people, and we thank you for that. But these are the words: Son of man, speak to your people and say to them, when I bring the sword against the land, and the people of the land choose one of their men and make him their watchman, and he sees the sword coming against the land and blows the trumpet to warn the people, then if anyone hears the trumpet but does not heed the warning, the sword comes and takes their life, their blood will be on their own heads, since they heard the sound of the trumpet but did not heed the warning. James, thank you for blowing the trumpet.
Thank you, John. I appreciate the time. Bless you.
You too. Bless you.